All right, sorry for that bumpy start. I'm glad everyone's here for the first reading of 2023, and we are now into the 10th session working through the economics at the end of our delusion. As I was saying before the little technical mishap, for those who may have missed the previous readings, the link to those will be available in the description box, and that'll be easy to find. The thing that I think I would just point out is that we're now at the section of how this happened. You know, we've been through a lot of theory. We've been through several weeks of just, LaRouche began by sort of laying out the ground rules for a science of physical economy, which simply means treating economics as a system, which both recognizes the obligation for creative spontaneity in the individuals, the need for individuals to have freedom, dignity, right? The concepts contained in the US founding documents, while at the same time as that respect for the individual is maintained and the respect for creative, unexpected surprises is maintained. At the same time, there are the recognition of actual objective laws. That there are us, human beings always exist. They coexist together as a social species within a system. We have certain physical attributes that require inputs, minimal inputs of things like fresh water, food, basic calories. These things require, especially as your population quantitatively grows, there must be qualitative transformations in our technological basket that allows us to have productive powers to sustain the agricultural and industrial requirements to sustain that growing quantity of people. So there's a quality-quantity relationship. And that change, that qualitative improvement in technological base that sustains more people with less effort being put in is the consequence of creative metaphysical ideas pertaining to eurekas, these beautiful leaps out of the ignorance into knowledge that can be translated through improved forms of language, mathematics, practices into ways that bring us into better coherence, harmony with the laws of creation that God created. It's a wonderful reciprocal relationship, and it's something which was explored when you read the writings of people like St. Augustine of Hippo, you read Plato, his Timaeus, you read Cicero. There's so many great thinkers over the years who have emerged, who have tapped into this fact of existence, of life, and have treated it in various treatises, often dialogues is the way it's often been treated. Thomas More Erasmus treated this. Confucius treated this in his own way, as did his students, in various manners. We've seen this as Kwan demonstrated many months ago through various Indian writings as well, in the Indian tradition. We've seen this grappled in various ways, always sort of converging on a similar set of truths, but with uniquely distinct characteristics of the various cultures that are experiencing the universe and trying to make sense of things in their own terms. So now we're at a place now where we're living through an economic collapse. It's not the first time this has happened. And as LaRouche got across in the opening remarks of his paper that we read a long time ago, it shouldn't be a surprise. Based on the sets of ideas that we permitted to be normalized in our system, especially after the murder of John F. Kennedy and his brother Bobby, there was a new set of norms, a new paradigm ushered in with a lot of trauma attached to it. People were scared shitless, right? Having seen the Vietnam War, a bunch of irrational imperial moves, their great heroes were cut down. They didn't know what to think about anything. And so there was a lot of trauma collectively, and a new set of norms was brought in that created that introduced the idea that was very foreign to the American and Canadian and Western experience, which is that we could consume without producing. That was new. We could be a consumer society, right? We could start exporting all of the dirty industries and factories that we used to have, and just have other darker skinned people around the world that we don't have to look at do that work, and we could pay them cheap labor and they could have their sweatshops, and now we could just consume things. And somehow that would be the new forever model. And for dumb people at the lower end, they were induced to go along with that. For the people higher up in the chain of command, they kind of knew, as we've come to increasingly see, they kind of knew that was designed to blow. It was never designed to be a forever model. It was designed to be a time bomb. And so now we're living through the ruptures of that system. And this is what LaRouche in 2001 was writing about in this paper, as we've come to discover. And he was just simply saying, you could know this if you just look at the destruction of the food production. That's all. We've had all of these new techniques of producing wealth with debt, gambling, that has become common practice in Wall Street, and money has replicated itself in absurd degrees. So yeah, that's one thing, but there's been no parallel growth of the real economy that we live in. That's been atrophied year to year. And so there's been really no economic real growth since for 50 years. And so he was writing this in 20 years ago, saying unless we get some systemic changes that he's been outlining in the previous readings, unless something of that caliber is infused, we're going to have a collapse. And that collapse is going to accompany wars. It's going to accompany really, really terrible things, paralleled only to the worst things that we've read about in the dark ages of the 14th century. Now, in today's world, we do have an actual coalition of civilizational forces, as I think everyone here is aware, that are increasingly rejecting that outcome of depopulation, world government, and everything that goes with. But it's not resolved, and it's especially not resolved here in the West. So I won't say anything more because the recordings were made. So what we'll do is just do a screen share and get on with that. If I could just find the window. Here it is. Okay. Can folks see the PDF? Kelly, nod if you could see the PDF. Okay, John sees it. Everyone sees it. Okay, good. So last time I think we edited. Cool. We ended at page 50. Yeah. Okay, here we are. So no one needs to be, there's only a few of us, so no one needs to be on mute, unless there's background noise in your area. We're at the section that begins with strategic defense and economy. We've just, I will say this, the last section did go through a little bit of Franklin Roosevelt's economic recovery. What Franklin Roosevelt actually did to declare war on Wall Street, bring in the breaking up of the Wall Street banks with Glass-Steagall, the idea of restoring Abraham Lincoln's system in the form of the New Deal, which put monetary behavior into a subservient position to the needs of the development of the nation and the people as a whole through thousands and thousands of major infrastructure projects that increased the productive powers of labor, that increased abundance, that overcame the limits to growth, which fascists and transhumanists of the 1930s and 40s were desperately trying to bring online as far as this eugenics, system that we've all looked at and discussed, which nearly came to become the New World Order back in the 1930s even. So this was subverted because of Franklin Roosevelt. He went through a little bit of JFK's reforms as well. And now we're jumping up into the period of Carter, Reagan, and another mischance to break the Cold War and break out of the system of a closed balance of power, Manichaean dualism that had been really misshaping much of the 20th century. So who would like to read today? Oh, and also, if there's anything people would like to say before we start reading, that's okay too. I don't want to take up all the sound space.
I'll read.
All right. Thank you.
Strategic defense and economy. About 2 decades ago, I knew then U.S. Representative Jack Kemp as a pleasant and hospitable fellow, whom I met several times in his office at the U.S. House of Representatives. He was keen on incentives, but unfortunately, he, like his virtual evil twin, Senator Phil Bollweevil Graham, preferred his remedies to be very simple ones. Incentives are extremely important for the functioning of an economy in the degree that they may express an efficient intention to do good, in the sense of Kepler's use of intention. Incentives, in the best sense of that term, are the expression of an experimentally verifiable universal physical principle. However, as anyone who has worked with the issue of sales and marketing policies and sales incentives should recall, most of the incentives concocted by the more typical, simple-minded sales managers do not even attempt to attain such imperial virtue. Simple-minded sales and other so-called economic incentives tend to backfire in one way or another, sooner or later. Like diets, which make you slimmer in the process of killing you, simple-minded monetary and related incentives, such as monetarists' measures of so-called fiscal austerity, are often witches' potions, whose side effects may be worse than the disease for which they are advertised as remedies. The fact that the accounting office says 2 measures of performance are correlated statistically does not mean that they will continue to correlate in that way if one of the figures is used as the primary basis for a novel sales or marketing incentive. The apparent goal will often be achieved temporarily, but usually with undesired long-term side effects on the account of more essential ultimate objectives. The relevant point here is to understand why simple-minded use of incentives will usually defeat the very purpose which the credulous authors of such policies had thought they had intended, as former Representative Kemp-Roth legislation produced some among the awful consequences, which are displayed among the economic ruins of our formerly robust U.S. economy today. Intentions tend to succeed only if and when they reflect a comprehension of the complexities of the interaction between, on the one side, the individual and his act in a local setting, and on the other side, the reciprocal relationship between that action in that local setting and the economy as a whole. The popularized attempts to develop methods for optimizing the relationship of local actions to the economy in the large, such as input-output systems analysis based on Professor Wassily Leontief's methods for mapping of the U.S. economy, are a step in the needed direction of correlating the particular and the whole process, but they err in conceding to the pressures to reduce these reciprocal relationships to a linear approximation. The linear approximation is, in fact, useful, provided one is willing to learn from it, but without actually believing it. Linear input-output modeling is useful when it is employed as a method for adducing meaningful and real ontological paradoxes in the current linear thinking of professionals generally, or managements in particular.
Okay. So far, so good. There's a footnote 59. Who wants to, Declan, you want to do the footnotes today?
Yeah, sure.
Sweet.
Okay.
This is a little one.
59. As I did during the 1950s, I take sides with Leontief against the ivory tower faddists of Tijal Koopman's Operations Research Circus.
Okay, I don't know what that means. If anybody here has an idea what he was talking about, please say something. That's okay. All right, that's going to be a Google search later. So any questions so far? Are we pretty much on point here with what the gist of his idea is? Okay. And Kelly, Julie, Paul, Susan, feel free to just speak up anytime you have a question that you want to just throw out there. Okay.
Sure.
Everyone knows what fiscal austerity is?
Just ask the Greeks.
Ask the Greeks. You're talking about 2012 Greeks?
Close enough. Yeah, I have friends who live in one of the islands off the southern coast of Greece, but they went through it all.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Declan, you're comfortable with that concept?
Not quite.
Okay, simple. Anybody? Well, actually, hey, Paul, you want to elucidate?
But basically, I mean, it's call it a loan if you like, and coming from the World Financial Organizations, but it comes with contingencies such that the repayment of the loan and the debt incurred through the loan becomes your first priority, which means you quite often have to go the austerity route, cutting back on social services, pensions, people's ability to maintain living standards, et cetera, under a broad heading, fiscal austerity.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, basically you got yourself in an economic quagmire, you got yourself in a lot of debt. Easy solution: cut the budget, right? Privatize your healthcare system, slash the budget and whatever, and then you'll save money, and then you could pay your debt. But then in so doing, you've just kind of like done the 16th century bloodletting,
Mhm.
You don't have the energy available now to actually heal. So yeah, kind of like what he was saying with the diet plans that involve killing the person who's carrying out the diet.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. So for anybody curious, that's the little description next to the two figures is the delusional monetarist idea of incentives. Well-intentioned former Representative Jack Kemp's 1982 Kemp-Roth tax incentive legislation produced disasters of deindustrialization and speculation. Kemp's evil twin, Senator Phil Gramm, used deregulation's incentives to unleash the unbridled financial corruption and lawlessness typified by Enron, which had just happened as LaRouche was writing this paper.
Moving on. On the subject of choices among incentives, one of the most widespread and dangerous forms of lunacy today is the monetarist doctrine respecting inflation. The idea that inflation should be checked by fiscal austerity and depression resisted by tax cuts and monetary pump priming is the root of the folly of most recent decades' discussion of economic incentives. Jack Kemp was only one among the majority of members of Congress of his time who were lured into that kind of error. The management of such matters belongs properly to the Department of Regulatory Functions of Government. The success of the 1945 to 1963 post-war Reconstruction phase of the Bretton Woods monetary system is an example of this. The system of regulation set up under Franklin Roosevelt, as continued in U.S. domestic policy until the disastrous Nixon and Carter administrations, is an example of the only effective methods known so far for providing incentives to the combined public and private sectors of a modern agro-industrial economy. Here, for similar reasons, all attempts to apply the mind map of standard financial accounting to an economy fail, often disastrously, for precisely the same reason. We require a truly nonlinear conception of this reciprocal relationship between the individual action in a local setting and the whole physical economy in which that local action is situated. Any approach which is contrary to my warning here is therefore as is said among professional economists, a potentially fatal fallacy of composition of the array of facts considered. Contrary to the implied assumptions of Leontief et al., all of the crucial economic relationships are intrinsically nonlinear. Consider some of the most basic principles of economy to be applied to policy shaping in these matters. We must think in the same way indicated by my adoption of Riemann's conception of differential physical geometry as the appropriate standpoint from which to express the way in which the characteristic curvature of physical economic spacetime must be defined. In this application, the use of the term nonlinear were better understood by following the prescriptions I set forth within the preceding chapter. Substitute the term non-Eulerian, meaning the non-Lagrangian,
Lagrangian,
non-Kuchian, as also non-Newtonian. Typical is the demonstration by Carl Gauss, as by Leibniz earlier, of the absurdity of the entire axiomatically linear reductionist mathematical system from which Euler reduces his famous folly on the subject of what he termed imaginary numbers. Since this is a crucial point for all competent economic policy making, I summarize the essential definitions here.
You want to tackle that footnote?
Yep. Pedagogicals. Summarizing.
Yeah, it's just he's going to use that word a lot in future papers, but it's pedagogicals.
Pedagogicals.
Yeah.
And is summarizing and assessing Gauss's argument on the matter of the complex domain are provided for my associates and others by Bruce Director. For published elections, see Bruce Director, The Division of the Circle of Gauss's Concept of the Complex Domain, 21st Century Technology. So is he saying that Euler's, his famous folly on the subject of what he termed imaginary numbers? So what is he implying that imaginary numbers are should be used, or what?
Yeah, well, yeah, and they are used, right? But yeah, he's saying there was a bit of a sleight of hand, because when you look at people like Carl Gauss and the work he was doing, especially on magnetism and electromagnetism, especially of the Earth's poles, that all of that work he did, and he was working with the Humboldt networks in Prussia. I mean, some of the most incredible mappings of these new domains that were unseen by the eye but were intelligible were done according to a new type of geometric language that Gauss had developed when he was younger, which necessitated the development of a physical expression of imaginary numbers. And he didn't call them imaginary numbers. Gauss didn't do it. Everybody here know what an imaginary number is, as an example? John definitely does, yeah. Basically it's the easiest popular example is something like the square root of -1, right? So it's like we all know how to express the square root of 1 in a physical way. You just take a square of area 1 and you get the root of that. So what times what gives you 1? Well, or what times what gives you that square of 1, or same thing for square of area 2, right? So you have a square area 2, and then the square root of that is square root of area 2. Mathematically, it's like 1.416, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, you could demonstrate that geometrically. But as soon as you put a negative number, like square root of a negative number, how do you represent that in a geometrical way? Very, very difficult for the mind to wrap or create a concept of what that would be like. So what Gauss did is he was like, okay, well, let's maybe think about geometry as more of an action on a you know, we've all seen the XY grids, right? And he's like, well, let's have our positive and our negative numbers going like east west, right? In one direction you have the positive, other direction is negative, but then in the vertical, like Y axis, up and down, you'll have the the imaginary numbers going one way and negative imaginary numbers going another way downwards. And when you start doing that, you start seeing that there are new discoveries that you can make when you start conducting investigations on things like quadratic residues. Like you could start taking, oh boy, you know what? Without a blackboard, this is not so easy. So anyway, there's this whole way of thinking about geometry and geometric change rotationally when you utilize these negative numbers in the way that I just described on a grid, an XY grid. And you can demonstrate them physically. They're no longer imaginary. They're no longer simply aberrations that you use to make your calculations work, which is what people like Euler were trying to say. It was like, they're only useful to make your mathematical calculations work. They don't have any physical expression. That's why he called them imaginary. But that was a big mind fuck for people, because it's like, by doing that, you prevent the minds from ever investigating a way that they could be expressed not in a real way. So people stopped looking, and Gauss didn't. And so Gauss and his student Riemann continued this exploration, utilizing a very different appreciation of these so-called imaginary numbers, and found these were the master keys to unlock an entire anti-Euclidean geometry, a language, that would help you map the physical space-time of reality. And so LaRouche says that he's explained that in studying Gauss and Riemann, it was a really important part of his own development in the 50s at creating a science of physical economy and finding a mathematical sort of language of expressing a lot of these physical economic concepts that didn't have a mathematical correlative. So yeah, Susie, I'm sorry, I ramble a bit. What's up?
No, you're fine. I just now put my hand up. Okay, so the bottom line is the imaginary numbers are not really imaginary.
No, they're very real.
There is a way to work them out sort of in the physical space, and that led to a whole new set of discoveries.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, because I am not highly educated, so I'm just trying to follow along.
That's such a good, clear summary. That's it.
I'll draw another quick link. I think the mathematics of topology grew out of Gauss and Riemann too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally.
I either need to stay with you all long enough that I become highly educated, or listen to you long enough that I can dumb this down for other people.
Maybe both will happen at the same time. Julie just wrote a bunch of useful things. Yeah, calculus terms, differential equations, used a lot in electrical engineering. Absolutely true. That's if you go into electrical engineering, you're going to encounter imaginary numbers all over the place. That's because of Gauss. Yep. Thank you, Julie. Good thoughts, good points.
So economics today, do we use these imaginary numbers?
No,
we don't use those.
No.
How about in like Russia or China?
Maybe. I don't know.
Not sure.
But they're imaginary, right?
Well, I Sergei Glaziev is an economic scientist who's of this caliber of a real scientist, and who has been a student of LaRouche, and he's highly influential in Eurasia. So I'd like to think that important circles in Eurasia have been actually doing this type of work that LaRouche has been suggesting for many, many years. So I'm hoping that it's advanced. I'm hoping it's practiced in Eurasia. I don't know. They're certainly not making this a public thing that they talk about, though.
Yeah, well, there are many practical researchers in China using those things for practical stuff. Okay, for example, if you want to create the system of distribution of money, or how to contact things that can be very down to earth, like a swap exchange for the yuan, for example. And you need a machine to do it. You have to be into pure mathematical research, and it's part of it.
But do you think it's a competent mathematics, the way LaRouche is trying to poke people to treat math, or do you think it's still contaminated with the weak, the weak assumptions?
What do you mean by the weak assumptions?
Well, I mean, like the Euclidean, Newtonian assumptions of space-time that. Yeah.
And here I'm coming back again with one of my cassette. You have to, as with the numbers, okay, for example, the imaginary numbers, they are part of a very big set called the complex number, okay, and that in those complex numbers, you have the natural numbers, the integer, etc. Okay, the rational number and the irrational numbers, etc. So the way I see things, that you have subsets that can be useful for certain things, and you need to go to higher representation of the reality when you have to do things that are more difficult. So I go back to your example. Is Newtonian physics taught in high school in China? Yes, but does it? But is it said that it's the ultimate explanation of reality? No. Okay. Good. So I always come back to that philosophical understanding. There's no bad theory by itself. Okay, it's becoming bad if you think that it covers all the reality. So you need to know if a certain theory can be used in a subset of reality. Let's say it like that.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. As long as you recognize the place it has within a broader process, it's not, it doesn't, you don't give it value it doesn't deserve, but you don't necessarily discard it because it might have a use. That makes sense. Yeah.
If you look at the lexicon used by the modern physicists, the TOE, the theory of everything, okay? It shows a little bit that childish mentality, that we should have the theory of everything right now, and that should explain everything. Well, why not say simply that we have a certain representation of reality that is our present state of understanding? But let's open that space because those people don't want to think, because they want to close the domain of knowledge rather than to see it as something open to the infinite.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Well said.
That reminds me of the joy of pondering the uncertainty principle in quantum physics, which I think Julie mentioned in the chat. This was echoing that to her and as to me as well. And there's so much hope in that. There's so much hope in that. It's that little gap where God or some other potential, continually expresses itself, blossoming and blossoming forever.
Yeah, it's nice knowing that we'll never know everything. It's kind of hopeful.
Yeah.
It's kind of depressing if we think that, yeah, there'll be a time where there's going to be nothing new left to discover. That's really sad.
Yeah.
And the very idea of what Quan said about the theory of everything, I don't know where that comes from, but
It's been around for a
arrogant
while.
is that?
Yeah, but what Susan, the toe is a fantasy of the contemporary physicists, thinking that they would find something that would explain everything from the beginning of the universe, if there's a beginning. Okay, because once again, you can have a beginning of a cosmic cycle, but you cannot have a beginning of the universe with a capital U, okay, of cosmos.
It's amazingly arrogant. We're always learning. We're always growing. There's always more to discover.
Yeah. Well, I would like to offer a psychodynamic explanation. Okay, it's probably coming from the oligarchical attitude, because the oligarchy's wet dream has always been to control the ultimate knowledge. Okay, because if you control the ultimate knowledge, you wouldn't be at the top forever. And I think that kind of mentality under it is the oligarchical mindset.
That's exactly it. We already figured it all out. We all have it locked down. Nothing to see here. Just keep being your little cog in the machine.
And I would like to introduce, it will take 10 seconds, a theological concept that is very interesting, because theology can be very interesting sometimes, okay? I learned it in French, I wouldn't say it in French, okay? They said that there are three concupiscence, okay? Concupiscence, I'm sure that complicated French word, it must be the same word in English, okay? Concupiscence, okay? So you have the concupiscence of the flesh, meaning that you're attracted to sex and so on. You have the concupiscence of power, but the third concupiscence is the worst one, is the concupiscence of knowledge. Okay, so in the three cases, either with
flesh. Okay, hold on. I'm sorry. I think you're saying the word that I pronounce as concupiscence.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is a similar word to lust.
Yes, it's a fancy word for lust.
What's that word again?
The thirst for knowledge is included in that?
Yes, and that's why I want to mention it, because it's a very deep theological understanding. Okay, because you can have lust for the flesh, of course, but you can have lust for power too. But at the last level, you can have lust for knowledge, because why you can have lust for knowledge? It's because it's not for the purity of knowledge, but for using knowledge as a tool of power. Okay, that's why it's used. It's called lust for knowledge, and not the playful exploration for knowledge.
That's a very new idea for me too. I mean, it's rich. Is that something you've come up with as far as like an expanded definition of concupiscence, or is that?
I would have loved that it would have come from me. Okay, but unhappily, it's classical theology.
Really? Eh? Okay, yeah, it's not a concept I've encountered, but that's interesting. Yeah, it's like
my experience of
the wrong reasons for lusting after knowledge, not loving knowledge. Sorry, go on, Paul.
My experience, I think, is based just from literary readings or whatever. My understanding of the meaning of it is the feeling that two lovers have post coital bliss, lying back on the bed enjoying a post-sex cravenea, post-orgasmic cravenea or whatever. It was a description of a feeling.
What are we talking about?
That, as I seem to remember reading that on, in several novels as a description of the feeling of two lovers post-coitus, lying back in that blissful state. It was described as, now I'm going to have trouble pronouncing.
Oh, you're talking about just the basic definition of concupiscence, or something else?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of what Kwan's talking about, for example, I find fascinating because it's very new on my horizon. My horizon being that literary experience primarily.
Yeah.
But over time, like the telephone game, a word can morph and change and get twisted and be opposed to an older usage. As Kwan was describing those three concupiscences, I thought of the being like addicted or being a slave to that drive. It wouldn't be healthy if it struck anyone else in that context.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Because once again, we go back to the intention, okay? Because you can be a very good scientist in the basic meaning of the word, but if you're not driven by the right intention of playful exploration, it can be a source of evil.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It comes down to this fundamental schism, well described in A Course in Miracles, that the original error, the only error or sin, is to perceive a separation between you and I, or oneself and all of existence. And therein is the competition and the fear of being dominated. So then the lust to dominate, as opposed to a love of knowledge for the sake of celebrating it. Just like children and bouncing baby goats celebrate existence, because the feeling or the realization I am should make you all want to dance.
I love baby goats.
Yeah.
I have goats. There's nothing cuter in this world than a baby goat bouncing all over the place.
And if we felt safe and loved and help each other feel safe and loved, maybe that's what we would do all day long, I hope.
Yeah. We'd all become artists.
Amen.
Yeah, anybody who is watching this on YouTube and has not watched YouTube videos of happy baby goats bouncing around, Google that.
Oh my gosh.
And
We'll never see you again.
all right, cool. Back. Was that Kelly?
I was watching this one video there. This little baby's got a football helmet on, and he's knocking heads with a baby goat.
There's a lot of good there. Yeah. Anytime you're feeling the blue,
I can't believe I watch them, but goats. I watch them.
No, don't be ashamed. It's a good thing. All right, let's get back on track here. All right, so we're at in the evolutionary development of blah blah blah.
Indeed. In the evolutionary development of modern mathematical physics, from Cusa, Leonardo, and Kepler through Leibniz, Gauss, and Riemann, the most characteristic feature of the development of the relevant formalities has been, as I have emphasized here earlier, the process of discarding each and all of the types of arbitrary ivory tower sets of definitions, axioms, and postulates, which characterize the methods of Aristotle and of the prevalent defective forms of classroom and textbook instruction in so-called Euclidean geometry. This point is so crucial for understanding the possibility of an economic recovery that I must restate this point now once again. In the rise of modern science through chiefly the initiative of such of Cusa's writings on scientific method as his De Dacta Ignorantia, the most characteristic expression of progress in science itself has been the process of eradicating all Aristotelian and other reductionist forms of ivory tower definitions, axioms, and postulates from mathematics and replacing those with a new kind of axioms, notions of extended physical space-time magnitudes, concepts which are rooted entirely in the act of discovery of a universal physical principle. I have described that once again earlier in this present report. For the purposes of today's urgently needed reforms, that must be recognized as the central principle of the history and future development of all modern economy. The state of mind associated with today's financial accounting and related forms of academic economics dogma, such as the notion of sound measures of practical business management, is that those states of mind tend, in fact, not only to ignore, but to deny, even aggressively, the mission upon which all economic progress absolutely depends, the factor of anti-entropy in the physical economy. The foolish belief known as benchmarking expresses that kind of widespread mental disorder among today's leading business mismanagers. Hence, all of the so-called incentives of the monetarists and others on these matters prove to be worse than foolish in their effects. Such disoriented mentalities as those seduced into the cult of benchmarking represent a reversion to the pre-scientific level of the elatics, Aristotelians, and sophists, such as the modern followers of William of Ockham. They substitute a distorted shadow of experience for the substance, thus degrading the mathematical formulations copied from physical science to a sterile mere describing of appearances, as if at the blackboard, or the currently common surrogate for the blackboard known as the computer. In the end, it simply does not work, which, as the present world economic crisis attests, may turn out to be the end in more ways than one. Thus, professionals afflicted with such popularized academic follies as these inevitably tend to repeat Euler's Euler's. Someone said Euler's. Is that pronounced Euler?
I've always been doing Euler, but it might be
Yeah.
Euler. I'm not too sure.
I like Euler because it's the same way the Marx Brothers with their New York accents used to say things like Earl and water and all that funny stuff. They inevitably tend to repeat Euler's folly as typified by his foolishly deprecating complex numbers as merely imaginary numbers. It is in precisely the paradoxical implications of number theory, as considered since Cardan's cubics, that the modern mathematician has discovered afresh the fact shown by Gauss's oh, I'm getting tired. Disquisitiones.
Yeah, there you go.
They have discovered afresh the fact shown by Gauss's disquisitiones that it is not abstract mathematics as such, but the physical universe which has created even the simplest kinds of numbers, numbers whose manifest ontological paradoxes reveal the superior authority over mathematics of the controlling hand of notions of extended physical magnitude.
Declan, 61.
Oh, pardon me. This notation of the physical role of the complex domain is implicitly as ancient as Plato's writings, the ironies of the five Platonic solids, as in his Timaeus, and as emphasized in modern times by Pacioli, Leonardo da Vinci, and Kepler. The proof presented by those ancient and modern sources prefigured Gauss's argument in the matter of biquadratic residues and show up in such important locations as the successive corrections to Euler's mistaken assumptions on the prime numbers by Dirichlet and Riemann. Both geometry and number are products of the physical universe, not abstractions imposed upon the universe. They reveal this parentage in crucial ontological paradoxes, as the case of the golden section and the biquadratic residues attest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I think is a lot of these footnotes sometimes just have so much content in them, eh? But that's a big deal. Like one of the biggest sleights of hand that I think we've had to suffer under has been this idea that math and geometry are something human beings just created and put onto the universe, but the universe has no real correlation with them because they don't map perfectly. Because, as soon as you start, you can count things like, there's 4 chickens, you can count number 1, 2, 3, 4. So obviously there's a certain correlation no one can deny. But as soon as you start like mapping the idealized geometries that we can conceptualize into the physical world, you find things kind of break down and the physical world doesn't quite match up. So you can never like impose you can't impose a perfect circle or a perfect square in the physical real world that we're navigating through. And so the immediate knee-jerk reaction for idiots who have a little bit too much power is to say, well, thus they're two separate things. And we just created these artificial abstractions that we use to help us, but they're not connected to any ontological reality. But then how do you explain the fact that the golden section is something which is evident in all expressions of life, even in terms of the organization of the multiplication of rabbits, the proportions found in living systems, plant life, and including, even galaxies. And you look at just the contour of the spirals that we find in the growth functions of galaxies as they rotate. There's still processes that we find correlated to the golden section. So it's like, is that just a coincidence? Or is it the case that the universe, has a real causal relationship to the math and geometries that we're coming up with and developing? So it should be more, it sounds kind of self-evident, I think, as I'm speaking. Like it should be like, yeah, that's obvious, but it's really not. Like it's become much more obscured in our current society, this relationship. And there's this weird antagonism too between mathematicians and physicists, which is strange. I worked in a science department for about a year at Dawson College, and there's this weird like animosity between the physics professors and the mathematics professors. And I never quite understood why they don't like each other.
Well, I think that once again, you can have a psychodynamic explanation, okay?
Probably.
Because the math guys would think that they are in the pure contemplation of the forms, and the physicists are looked down because they are more considered as people having their hands in the dirt. And I had friends who are mathematicians and who are physicists, and they're very bright in their own domain, but they, when coming from psychodynamic interactions, they always prisoner of that kind of thing. Okay, but it comes from that the forms division of knowledge, because you are not imprisoned in the pure contemplation of the form or into acting into 4D or 3D reality. And when we speak of the complex domain, for example, the complex domain is more obvious because we have to tackle the general form of the universe. Okay, is it infinite? Is it infinite on a sphere? Is it infinite like the form of a saddle, or is it simply linear? Okay, so you have those very down to earth questions that would challenge the imagination, and from them you will need a more sophisticated language to express what your imagination. Okay, because imagination is primary, and you use the math to express your imagination. And when you have to tackle very complex problem, you will need to use some more complicated language. Okay, but you have geniuses. Well, in China, for example, there's a book called the Zhou Pi Xuan Jing, okay, the classic of mathematics of the Zhou dynasty. And in that book, having been written between the 10th century BCE to the 2nd century BCE, you have certain propositions who are very close to what goes with state many centuries later. Okay, so you have a minority in all civilization that would be very in advance compared to the average people, but it was not something that was in circulation in China very much at that time. Okay, 3,000 years ago. However, collectively speaking, we reach a certain moment when you need to expand that kind of language, because most of the people reach to the level that they would ask those kind of questions that would stimulate their imagination, and they would need a more complex language to express that.
Right.
Okay, so it's not a coincidence that Euler or Gauss express those in a perfect manner in the 18th century, because the 18th century has been the century of major astronomical discovery that stimulate that kind of question: what is the general form of the universe? And even have a question about the general form of the universe were more philosophical speculations, I would say, before the 20th century, before the Hubble telescope and so on.
Yes, Susie?
Do we know where the root of that division is? What Quan was just speaking about. It's like these different segments or topics of education. It's like there's been these invisible barriers erected between them. And it's like they're not allowed to touch each other.
Yeah.
Do we know where the root of that is?
Well,
Because
that's-
part of what we're discovering here is that everything is connected and it is so non-linear. Everything moves in cycles. But if we keep these barriers erected between these different aspects of education, then everybody stays segmented and fragmented and in their little boxes.
Yeah.
Do you know the root?
Well-
I think something happened back in Aristotle's day with what is it, Ptolemy? And
Yeah.
that whole thing, like after, yeah, in that day and age, they seem to politicize like science, geometry, and philosophy, and like basically that's kind of what we use today is the Aristotelian ways.
Yeah.
Instead of like maybe some of the older philosophers and who started the whole ball game running.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well,
Kelly, can you type into the chat the name you were trying to pronounce?
Ptolemy.
yeah.
Ptolemy.
PLO,
Ptolemy.
yeah.
Ptolemy.
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 Euclidean geometry, all that arise after Plato, I'm imagining.
Yeah.
And then we kind of politicized, or the Romans, I guess at the time, politicized all that. And in our Western ways, that's kind of what we base our system of science on, no?
It was certainly Aristotelian up to a point.
But let's not forget that, yes, that's Ptolemy. Let's not forget that general education was not something granted to everyone, okay? Not before the last 2 centuries. And when you had the public instruction, which has been established in the last 2 centuries, of course, the school has been created because there were some specific needs for certain kind of workers. So I would say that the basic answer is that your own education is your own responsibility, because no one will give you a complete education if you yourself is not curious or you're not enthusiastic, because most of the school given by the governments or by the public sphere are to answer to specific needs of the society, not to create philosophers or to create autonomous people. And I would say maybe it's a little bit provocative, but it's normal too. You cannot trust the other for your own education. You have to be responsible of it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So in general, by the time public education as we've known it was created, this system was already well in place and these barriers already erected.
Wow.
Yeah, it became kind of rigid.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Susan, oligarchy existed for 5 millennia or even more. okay?
Probably way before that. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
So
I'm just trying to play catch up big time. But
Well, the way I tend to
Kwame-
think about it in a clear, the way that there's so many ways of looking at it, right? But one way that I found useful is the idea of thinking of the universe as a place of quality and process, like that's becoming something that is better than what it is now, so that there's this yearning, this impulse that is primary, and so more of a verb based idea versus like the noun based approach to the universe of description, trying to treat or pretend that the universe is just these things that you can like wrap into boxes and put definitions on and just, you know, quantify everything that way. And if the more you get into that mode of thinking, the more your creativity, your ability to appreciate the good is increasingly crippled. It's not destroyed, but it's crippled. It's you know, you become more rigid in your thinking. You become less capable of just finding the that which is within you, which is capable of also qualitatively improving. So, you know, in Plato's Timaeus, a lot of people make fun of it because it's like, oh, there's these, you know, there's so many details that are not scientific in his approach. But in terms of the quality, it's all one examination over the idea of a universe made by a loving, living creator, which endowed that universe with certain properties of that creator impressed within all parts of the universe that are enshrined within our souls. And so you compare that to, you try to look for anything similar to that spirit in somebody like an Aristotle, in his metaphysics, it's not there. In fact, Aristotle just says we don't have a soul, we're a blank slate, a tabula rasa, you know. And in that world, it's not a world that you can really appreciate love in a deeper way, ontological way. It's just sort of a world of manipulation, of behavior, of maybe it has, you know, it's very low level. Yeah, I think if you get into that mindset too much, you create a separation. Sorry, what was that, Kelly?
Separated science and religion as well.
Well, that'll happen. Yeah, their faith and reason will become increasingly harder and harder to reconcile. Yeah, that'll occur. Which is why Kepler called for banning Aristotle from Christendom. You know, he's like, look, Aristotle acts like all of our science in Kepler's day was, the majority of it was shaped by Aristotelian and Ptolemaic methods of thinking. And he was like, look, I know this is not popular to say, but Aristotle doesn't believe we have a soul. And thus there's no place for this type of thinking in Christendom. And he openly, that's not like me putting words onto Kepler. That's Kepler directly in book 4 of his Harmonies of the World, saying like, if you want to be a scientist, you gotta let go of Aristotelian methods. So I used to think it was just LaRouche saying these things as a device. Like for the first, you know, little while when I started looking into LaRouche like a decade ago, I thought he was just sort of like using this Plato versus Aristotle dichotomy as a device to help people understand something. But then when you actually, the more and more you start reading the writings of people like Kepler or Cusa or Leibniz, you're like, no, LaRouche was not the first one. These guys are all Augustinian Platonists consciously identifying the poison of Aristotelian ways of thinking. Edgar Allan Poe does it as well in his Eureka. Like, it's all over the place. And most people just don't, they don't know to look for it, so they don't see it, where it's really everywhere.
Well, maybe I have a yin-yang mode of thinking, but each time that you find a Aristotelian-like mode of thinking, instead of attacking it, just say that it's a theory that would cover a smaller subset of reality.
Okay. Yeah. In most situations, I promise you, Quan, I will take the diplomatic approach, the Confucian approach. However, sometimes I'm gonna lambast it still, sometimes, depending on the context. But usually I'll take your approach. I agree. I should.
A smaller subset of reality, yeah, that's okay. and they are well, what did Shakespeare said? There's a lot more in reality than in your small philosophy. It's not the exact words, but I think it's from Hamlet. So it's not only Confucian, it's Shakespearean.
That's true. I guess for me, the thing that kind of gets me, and I agree, the diplomatic temperate approach is the best approach. I agree. And that's some of my Western like combativeness that comes out sometimes. But the thing that gets me sometimes is, I guess it's the intention and the design. It's like, did these things arise organically in an honest appreciation or exploration of the universe? And usually when I start looking at the rise of a lot of these sets of ideas that are very influential and might even have some use, like Newtonianism or Aristotle, and you look at the political dynamics of what Aristotle or Newton were a part of, what they were doing, what the intention was that deployed the crafting of their systems, it's like there was an actual design in many of these cases to cripple our minds and to make us more subdued. And that's where it kind of like, for me, I get like,
Well,
my righteous indignation gets turned on and I'm like, attack.
well, yes, I think you're right, because if there's something which would be timeless and maybe not timeless, but lasting a very long time, it would be the battle between the playful exploration approach and the oligarchical approach. Okay, that is the true battle between good and evil in my mind, because going back to the three kind of loss or concupiscences, the loss of the flesh and of power, they're not so serious, okay? But the true loss is the loss for knowledge. And in that loss is the true battle between good and evil, the the playful exploration approach and the oligarchical approach.
Mm-hmm. Right
And
on.
just a small detail. I said that it was in the Chopi Swan Jing that you have the Gaussian elimination method discovered
Oh. We'll
by
get
the
him.
Chago. I made a mistake. It's in another book called The 9 Chapters on the Mathematical Art of the same period.
Who wrote that?
Many mathematicians between the 8th, 9th century BCE to the creation of the empire at the end of the 3rd century BCE. So let's say 28 to 22 centuries ago.
Cool. Yeah, there's a lot of people who try to say that China is not they're not a scientific society. They're more of a, you know, a concept-based society. But I'd like to know more about the ancient development and exploration of geometry and math and astronomy in China. Have you actually, Quan, have you heard about the case of I was reading a book going through Confucius and how I think it's a book of the Analects which went missing on scientific method, like a full. Have you heard of something about that?
Well, it's I think that you are referring to a book, one of the 4 books, meaning one of the 9 classics on general epistemology, and that book is Ta Xue, the Great Learning. Okay, so because once again, what is important is agape, okay, that enthusiasm.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want that enthusiasm, you have to study general epistemology. Because if you don't have that excitement, you will fall into the oligarchical trap. Okay, but because once again, the loss of knowledge is truly at the center of the battle between good and evil.
Right.
And if you don't have the right path, the right epistemological path to maintain that natural instinct of playful exploration, you would fall into the oligarchical trap, because you would learn stuff to get power, to become priest if you want, okay? Because the so-called scientists nowadays, they are not really scientists. They are rather kind of priests defending their ivory tower. So
yeah, they are the priests of today's cult of science.
Exactly, of scientism and not science.
Correct.
So, and that Ta Xue, the Great Learning, is the general epistemology manual of the Confucian tradition.
But what you're saying about the lust for knowledge, I break that down into knowledge versus wisdom.
Yeah,
Because if you're seeking wisdom, then you're also cultivating those things in your own character, like humility. And I typed it to you in the message box. You were bringing that scripture to mind from James, where it's talking about knowledge that puffs up versus knowledge that is meek and humble and easily entreated. Because if we are working on cultivating that character of the childlike faith and I can't remember those words you're always using, but just that awe of discovery, then you're not trying to lord it over other people. You're trying to share from a humble place. You're not seeking to control others. You're seeking to share with others.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting that. I think that's a very fair way of putting it.
yeah, absolutely.
I don't want the thirst for knowledge to be a lust. I want it to be just the desire for me to grow.
Yeah. It shouldn't be a dirty process. It should be a good thing. Yeah.
Wisdom is applied knowledge.
Mm.
Well, I would say that on a very down-to-earth level, many good intentioned parents would say things like, it's better for you to go to college because you will have more opportunities, for example, okay? It's come from very good intentions, okay? But that little phrase can push you into the oligarchical trap if you don't have a personal enthusiasm for playful exploration.
Mm-hmm.
And all good intentions parents would say to their kids, in a way or in another, go to college because you will have more opportunities. It's common sense.
I dropped out of college because it was corrupting me, but that's not for everybody. I get it.
Yeah, but you got lucky enough to have met Lyndon LaRouche.
That was a fortunate happenstance. Yeah, that was not likely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't want to bug you, but it could have not happened.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think if you have like a solid sense of who you are and a good method of being a sovereign thinking person who can maintain your own, you can be in a lot of different environments and make the most of it. Take the best, leave the bad, and that's totally doable. You just have to be really solid. And Declan's parents have done a good job. I'm impressed.
Thank you.
But even just a little while ago, when Quan was talking about, the curiosity and the fact that the truth is, our education is our own responsibility. I mean, Quan, for me, I hope you are grateful that your curiosity was not squashed, that you were raised in an environment where that was encouraged. But I think for a large portion of our population, there's not been any place for genuine curiosity.
Yeah.
It's all been driven by, you have to figure out how to educate yourself so you can get out there and make a living. It's just all survival mode and then greed.
Mm-hmm. Too much of that. Yeah.
But those systems are falling
Exactly.
right now. And we have got to be prepared and equipped to help bring that curiosity back to life in other people who it got squashed in.
Yeah. Well said.
That's a big part of our calling in this age, is to rekindle that curiosity.
Absolutely. And that's the great learning. That's right. Okay. It doesn't have to be the Chinese stuff, but the great learning is the epistemological pathway.
See, isn't that really a huge part of the core of the Chinese culture?
Yes, well, that's
Isn't
the
their
classic.
whole philosophy more about wisdom than knowledge?
Well, I prefer to say epistemology because it wouldn't be more obvious to Westerners, okay? Because epistemology,
That broke
wisdom
up.
in
Can you say
English,
it again?
the English word wisdom uh, uh, is not a shining word, okay? That's why I prefer to say epistemology, because wisdom in English, at least in our century or in the 20th century, has a banal, down to earth meaning. So epistemology meaning the okay, I use Plato, like epistemology is the path to the sun of the absolute. Okay, meaning epistemology is the way to truth, goodness, and beauty. And what the Confucians call tashui, the great learning. And once you reach to that enthusiasm, but not the natural enthusiasm that you have between 0 and 5 years old, but that you are capable to maintain till your death, the knowledge or information is not so important because you are in the mode of creating that knowledge or that information. And precisely because you're in the mode of creation, you're more capable to say, okay, that theory is for that subset of reality. That theory will cover a bigger subset of reality, and etc. Okay, so it's more a playful mode, and not the attitude of a priest, okay, fighting to defend his ivory towers against the general population, because they are geniuses in the general population. They want to dumb down because they don't want competition, of course.
That doesn't mean we shouldn't use the word wisdom.
No, of
But
course.
that being said, your exposition of the importance of the term epistemological growth is very good, especially when associated with the issue of play, and it's true, like wisdom's been dragged through the mud. It's been
Exactly
associated with this very. But that being said, words, there's a battle over words, right? And the definitions, the meaning of words has an ambiguity. So if we can reinfuse some dignity into the abused word wisdom, then let's do that too.
Oh, thank you.
I like it very much, to reinfuse some dignity into the word wisdom.
Extract.
I think that is the definition of what Quan Li does, is brings the dignity back in to these ideas that have been so corrupted. So thank you, guys.
Amen. So we got 30 minutes ahead of us. Let's finish this section. I'm sure we can do it. I'm positive we can do it. It's 2 more pages. Oh yeah, we lost our reader. Right. Okay. So yeah. Right. Bruce had to depart. Who would like to pick up from Bruce?
I'll give it a try if nobody else will.
Sure.
Where are we? In the rise of?
The fundamental rule of.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. The fundamental rule for competent economists is national, and the world economies must progress or die. Each principle and its derived technologies, which is generated as knowledge by cognitive discovery of hypothesis, appears as something new in the spectrum of economic action. It is this relative newness which is the only ultimate source of anti-entropy, and therefore ultimately the only source of actual profit. Any economic policy which resists such innovations is intrinsically entropic and therefore tends towards the worst ultimate outcome either sooner or later. We are now dwelling in a time during which later has become inevitably sooner. This needed anti-entropy is introduced to practice, not merely as commentary or interpretation, but in an appropriate form of action. This action requires several additions to the previously defined chart of cost accounts of any sane accountant or business manager. It represents an added cost, which must be served, for example, paid, as the price of economic success, even economic survival. It is on this point that standard accounting practice fails, on principle, sometimes fatally. Popularized monetarist delusions of fiscal austerity typify the potentially suicidal psychotic phase of such popularized errors of method. Contrary to such varieties of ignorance and delusion, there are two general keys to solving the kinds of problems associated with the way in which financial accounting typically ignores the crucial aspect of the reciprocal relationship between local action and the larger situation which that action occurs. Long sentence. First, consider the way in which valid new technologies are generated for application to specific situations. Second, consider the relationship between local action as such and the general environment as such.
Go a little bit, I request that you go a little bit slower in the tempo.
Sorry, yeah, okay. To begin with, therefore, consider how, in modern economy, this role of creativity in making true net profit possible is found most commonly in two kinds of institutionalized activity. First, it is found on the one side in an educational system which features pedagogical methods equivalent to a classical humanist program, and also features related emphasis on both pedagogical reenactments of crucial discoveries of principle and fundamental research experiments based upon the lessons derived from experience in mastery of pedagogical experimentation. Second, it is expressed to great positive effect by what are described as science driver programs, work in the footsteps of Leonardo da Vinci and Kepler, such as the Program for Science of Francis Jean-Baptiste Colbert, or the initial period of life of Monge Legendre École Polytechnique, and more recently, 20th century nuclear and space programs as conducted principally as initiatives of Germany, Russia, and the USA. Although the Science Driver program, at least implicitly an extension of the work of the educational system as a whole, it has well-known special features of its own. The modern military doctrine of peace, the investment of resources, is that right?
The investment of resources, yeah.
Okay, yeah. The investment of resources on a large scale by governments has an effect on the physical economy akin to the way in which modern warfare has impacted the technological and related development of economies since Leonardo da Vinci's and Machiavelli's time. Again, the revolution in warfare launched jointly by Lazare Carnot and the Monge Legendre École during the 1792 to 1794 interval is the neatest example of the relationship between large-scale science driver programs and the related technological effects in the history of modern warfare. The US economic mobilization for war under Franklin Roosevelt expresses that connection. The most significant application of that connection proves a case directly opposite to the opinion of many loose-tongued contemporary pacifist ideologues. It was out of the development of crash program approaches to the defense of the modern sovereign nation state against ancient and feudal traditions of perpetual warfare and world empire that the modern military doctrine of peace was achieved. Machiavelli reflects this in his policies. The 1648 Treaty of Westphalia, on which all valid attempts at civilized life is dependent axiomatically since, expresses the same trend. 1776 to 1783 war policy of Benjamin Franklin et al. Expresses that outlook on the role of technological progress in securing the establishment of an order conducive to peace. The modern theory of a strategy of defense came chiefly from the combined influence of scientist-soldier Lazare Carnot and the German classical humanist Gerhard Scharnhorst. Modern policies of strategic defense, like my own proposals for what was later publicly presented by President Reagan as a Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, used the military implications of a science driver program as an approach to durable peace. That created the opportunity, which has been mislaid during the 17 years since Soviet General Secretary Yuri Andropov flatly rejected President Reagan's and my own proposed discussion of the matter And since the utopian faction, typified by my since deceased enemy Daniel Graham's utopian faction within US military and related circles, implicitly allied themselves with Andropov in doing their utmost to sabotage the program from the US side. The study of the fortifications design, constructed and commanded by Vauban, and Carnot's articulation of the principle of strategic defense attest to the historical implications of my own and President Reagan's proposals on strategic defense back during especially the 1979 to 1986 interval.
Declan, you want to hit that?
Sure. 62. My first published statement pushing for development of the possibility of a strategic ballistic defense based on new physical principles was issued during 1979. My proposal for such a policy was first issued in August 1979 as part of my campaign against President Jimmy Carter for the 1980 Democratic Party's U.S. presidential nomination. Later, at the close of 1981, I suggested an exploratory discussion of my proposal to relevant circles in the Reagan administration and launched the campaign for that policy in February 1982, both publicly and in my back-channel discussions with the Soviet government on this and other subjects. The formulation of the relevant segment of President Reagan's March 23, 1983 televised address was prepared on the basis of the essential features of my earlier specifications in the back-channel discussions of February 1982 to February 1983.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a good video that was done by, narrated by Jeff Steinberg many years ago. I'll try to find it and share it with you guys. Going through sort of the history of this fight. And I always had a very negative idea of the Strategic Defense Initiative, or AKA Star Wars, you know, and
yeah,
for good reason, right? George Bush Sr. started talking about it. It's part of the Project for New American Century outlook to try to, you know, weaponize space and surround all rivals of the USA with weapons that can, you know, take out their ability to respond to an attack. So it's like, it's definitely been a concept that has been used to do a lot of, or advance a lot of evil. But I didn't realize until I met LaRouche and started looking into the history of it, that at the heart, at the root of it was actually this very different concept of what Reagan talks about in 1983 on TV, when he offers the Soviets the opportunity to jointly develop and control this new system that would render any launch of a nuclear weapon obsolete, because, you know, you'd be bringing online new plasma-based weaponry, new forms of, just new designs for laser technology that could then deactivate any type of warhead. But the fact that it would be jointly controlled by both Russians and the Americans at the same time was a very different idea, which unfortunately was, abandoned pretty soon after Reagan first proposed it, and it was turned into this perverse monster.
Continuing.
Yeah.
Today, crash science driver programs will be the cutting technological edge of the effort to put both the US and world economies back on the pathway towards sustained growth out of the present world depression. The political impact of the physical benefits of such progress is large, which should not be permitted to blind us to the more crucial social factor. The crucial point is that a people which locates its human identity in the cognitive nature of the human individual and his or her social relations is the only conception of man which could ever promote a durable peace on this planet. All utopian schemes have shown themselves to be simply the babbling of the kinds of fools who wander into war out of the effects of their own folly. Proposals for world government and globalization, or world rule of law, are the most likely causes of the generalized, even perpetual warfare, which is being proliferated on this planet today. Typical of the sheer horror of such lunacies is the joint proposal of the madmen H.G. Wells and Bertrand Russell for achieving world government through the terror of preventive nuclear warfare. Peace was never a self-subsisting state of political affairs. Peace, as distinct from the temporary absence of warfare, is achieved only through those forms of cognitive progress, as in classical culture and science, which foster the individual's and nation's conception of man as a cognitive being. The science driver program, with the cultural optimism it fosters, is inherently both the best way to win a war and also the surest pathway to durable peace. Its characteristic feature is that it accelerates the rate of discovery and transmission of new physical principles into large-scale infusions of these discoveries into the practice of both the machine tool sector of industry, but also into the broadest possible application of these new technologies into production and use in general. Changing the situation.
No, I think that's a good place to end it. I mean, how long is the next section? I feel like it's, yeah.
I can always read faster, Matthew.
Quality over quantity. No, that was great. I think your pacing was
yeah.
fantastic. No, that was good. Yeah, let's.
You got to remember to stop and take a breath every now and again.
Well, yeah, it definitely it breaks all the rules of grammar school that I was taught.
Yep.
But yeah, I find it's LaRouche's technique of writing has always been to have the rules of grammar obey the spoken word. So it sort of forces you as a reader to get into the mindset a little bit more of like, how would you be thinking if you were saying these things, which would then induce you to find the right places kind of intuitively to take the breaths. But otherwise, yeah, if we just obey the the way we were trained to read, then we'd suffocate reading LaRouche. Yeah. But yeah, no, I think the idea of the science driver program is really, really important. And obviously we've seen these things done more and more, unfortunately, so far in our small history when times of war have struck. But it doesn't mean that science drivers could only happen in times of war. Like, there's no reason that they couldn't also happen or shouldn't happen in times of peace. Like, there was that image there of the space program, right? Here it is, today's crash science driver programs will be the cutting technological edge of the effort to put both the US and world economies back on the pathway towards sustained growth out of the present world depression, precision laser development under the strategic defense. So yeah, this is just, I guess, some of the I'm not actually sure what we're looking at there. I thought it was like a space shuttle or something.
That's a laser weapon.
Is that what that is?
That's what that is.
That's what that is? That's a laser weapon? Oh, okay.
That's that's what precision laser development under the Strategic Defense Initiative.
Yeah, right.
You betcha, that's a laser weapon.
That's a laser weapon. Okay. Huh.
Or potentially a version of a directed energy weapon.
Right. I guess so. Huh. Good call.
And I'd like to know what the date of that picture is.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, is it pre 2011? Sorry, 2001.
It's a black and white. So probably,
yeah, okay.
Probably like early 80s.
Just throwing that out there. I'm thinking of the years of development since that picture was taken and an event like 9/11.
Oh, you're alluding to the idea that the buildings were taken down by laser.
Well, look, I can't remember the name of the scientist off the top of my head right now, but she's rather well known in the 9/11 community for her evidence and theory on the use of a directed energy weapon.
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to a lot at this point. I've seen some pretty persuasive. I've been pretty persuaded of the controlled demolition thing. That's where I'm at right now. But it's true. Like, it's hard to account for a lot of the rubble. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to ignore that one when it comes to Tower 7. But in terms of the simple dissolution of matter, the dustifying of pretty much the totality of Tower 1 and 2. The directed energy weapon approach that is outlined, just can't remember her last name now. I don't want to say it's compelling, but it's certainly, you know, it has to be considered. Has to be considered.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
I mean, you know,
Well, you know,
again, just on you know, on the basis of, you know, having an open-minded attitude to things, I think the evidence that I've seen her and the writings that I've read, you couldn't eliminate it. You know, I would need convincing and compulsive evidence that she's dead wrong, and I've not seen that. That's for sure.
yeah. But I would like to propose that it could be both, because to confuse people.
Yeah.
It's true. Definitely wasn't a guy in a cave.
No, no. It was not from Bora. It was not from Bora something. I forgot the name of the cave.
Oh.
You know that the French TV at the time showed images of a very complex subterranean headquarters that are supposedly Bin Laden's headquarters.
Where in Afghanistan?
Yes, exactly. Because the French TV at the time showed all kind of photograph and design, supposedly representing Bin Laden's headquarters, and it's looked like something very sophisticated, futuristic, and so on.
Well, it would need to be to get away with everything that happened on 9/11, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's part of the propaganda.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's part of the brainwashing. And of course, everyone know that Trump made the comment as it looks like a controlled demolition. And the day after, he said, "Oh no, I make a mistake." If you remember,
Right.
Yeah, I think that 9/11 was an American operation, and it's a combination of the aircraft hitting, but there was pre-located charges that did a controlled demolition. The buildings wouldn't have come down with just the airplane hit. It was a setup. And the third building that went down, there was no reason for it to go down. But there was an investigation ongoing within it for the missing trillions of dollars out of the Defense Department.
Absolutely.
And all those papers were gone. And then they cleaned up the buildings and moved them out before any investigation could be performed.
And amazingly, the Pentagon was hit in exactly the same place, wasn't it? The recently refurbished accounting department.
Yeah,
doing a similar investigation.
Yeah. You look at Waco, Oklahoma. You look at Waco, Oklahoma City, 9/11. The first thing they do is get rid of the evidence.
Yep.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, there's a book written by a guy named Christopher Bolin, Bollyn. I don't know if you guys read that book. I think it's the final book on that case. And his favor the theory of the controlled demolition with the special military substance.
Thermite.
Thermite. Thank you. And
that's what like melts the steel beams, right? The thermite.
Yeah, exactly. Because you need to reach a temperature like almost 2000 degrees Celsius,
right,
to make the steel beam melt.
Right.
Yeah.
There were lots of traces of thermite, purportedly anyway, in dust samples that were recovered sometime after the event and then analyzed. And I think one of the first ones came out of Europe.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, there was a lady called Mrs. McCullough living in the neighborhood, giving to Professor something that powder, and he analyzed that powder, and that powder is thermite. So that's why I said that the book by Bolin is probably the ultimate book on that case.
A lot of good books on that case, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorites by Dr. Farrell postulates that, in fact, there may well have been a level of penetration of the American operation by a third party.
Yeah.
Which would be, by his terms, the Nazi International. A lot of very strange things happened that day.
He separates the Nazi International with the thing controlling current U.S. government policy.
Yeah, look, a kind of a fight between two mafia dons, if you like, one revealing itself, as to what kind of power it really had. Now, one of the pieces of evidence is on the day of 9/11, shortly, which might explain why Bush looked so damn stunned in the primary school.
Yeah.
The command center at the White House got a phone call from somebody unidentified who said they were in possession of all of the nuclear codes and all of the access to every defense installation in the American system by virtue of hacking or whatever. And they promptly proceeded to read out a few codes to prove that what they were saying was true. And they ended the conversation saying, what's the president's plane? Air Force One is next. Okay, now what immediately happened? Where did Bush go straight away? Did he go back to Washington? No, the first thing he did was to head for the #1 US Air Force base in control of the nuclear facilities so that he could take control, command control. And then from there, he flew to the second installation and did exactly the same thing, took control of the presidential codes, had them changed or whatever as quickly as buggery. And then from there went to Washington. Some pretty strange events there.
Yeah, I'll have a look at the Farrell analysis. I mean, for my assessment, the thing that incorporated all of the leading Nazis after World War II is the same thing which took over control of the government over JFK's body. So I didn't really see that as a competing faction. But anyway, yeah, I'll have a look. Definitely, we can certainly agree that we were lied to, and the fact again that the Pentagon audit happened or was released the day before 9/11, and as somebody alluded to, all of the auditors were located in that particular section of the Pentagon that was destroyed is probably not a coincidence.
That's right.
That was the first time $2 trillion went missing in the Pentagon, and then people forgot to think about it afterwards. No, it's a big deal. Well, yep, Declan.
I was just gonna say I've kind of wondered for a little bit. You have after 9/11. Obviously, I was born. I wasn't around during 9/11, but I've heard stories about like Bush goes out there at the baseball game, throws the first pitch. It's the big deal. Everybody's really happy. Really, there's a united country. But then our response to 9/11 is not to build a pair of twin towers that are twice as tall and dare them to blow them up again. It's to build a morbid pool there to remind us of what was there. And it's like
dark abyss.
Is that the American response to this? That's not American thing to do. I don't know.
No, it's not. And if anybody's seen the twin tower location, I've seen it, and yeah, it's really demoralizing. It's just a giant dark hole. Just to like reinforce trauma or something. It's
exactly.
Yeah. It was a psyops,
yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
Well, and
security.
Sorry, go.
Don't say the C word though. This is gonna go on YouTube.
The C word with in five letters.
Yeah.
No. Because I said no. It's not the same C word. I said that 9/11 was a psyops, but the COVID-19 is also a psyops.
That's what I was talking about. Don't say that.
Really?
Well, I'm sure this will get by the censors, but yeah, YouTube's a bitch.
Come on.
I think you could say that now.
Well, Matt, you just cut that part.
That's work for me.
Yeah.
I gotta cut and render and
You should do this on Twitter now.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah,
maybe.
These last couple of paragraphs that we read were bringing back to mind the discussions that you've had, Matt, recently about some of Putin's speeches talking about there's two Americas.
Yeah.
And this one, we can work with them. This other one, not so much.
Yeah. Yeah, Putin's
I
solid.
do think that more and more people just worldwide are waking up to all of the divide and conquer strategies. And the continual warfare is just not necessary anymore. And it's not going to be tolerated much longer.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody does just have the desire to just raise their families in peace. And there's just no reason for this nonsense to continue.
Power,
Was that Kelly?
power. Whoever's got the money, they want more power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you might be interested to follow the discussions of Davos next week, starting next Monday.
Yeah. That should be kind of interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, they're certainly not good at subtlety. They'll tell you exactly what they want to do. And somebody made a good point to me in a recent interview, and I forget who it was. Might have been Mel K. But she was in just talking about the we are many, they are few, and just looking for some empirical data of that, because people get a little bit demoralized around, working with or having an interface with a lot of just dumbed down sheep. The fact is, those who do want peace on earth, they don't want to be corralled into tyranny, are the vast majority. And this oligarchy is good at controlling mainstream media, perception management, but they're not really good at reality itself. As we saw with the debacle in Afghanistan, how that's panned out, how a lot of what they've been trying to do in Ukraine has not panned out the way they've wanted it. There's so many points where their plans have really fallen. They didn't get the regime change of Bashar al-Assad the way they wanted to. And Mel K pointed out that in Davos last year, they live streamed all of their sessions on YouTube. Everything. You could watch it in live time. And when you look at all of those videos that they live streamed, the maximum video had something like 8,000 views, which is like, these are people who are professing to represent the world, 8 billion people, and they can barely get 8,000 people who care enough to just watch their proceedings, So there's really, they're talking to, I don't want to call it preaching to the choir because it's much more satanic than that, but there's definitely just a little self-flattering group that's very, very tiny and probably very insecure about the fact that most of the world is waking up to their manipulations and doesn't want to be played anymore. So they have a lot of reason to be afraid and insecure at this point. And that's good. That gives me a certain sense of it lifts my spirits.
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Oh, no, that was all I was going to say.
In every single different group I'm a part of, I'm looking to find more and more people where we truly are waking up to our own power.
Oh, yeah.
I wrote you an email one night and I did not send it, but whenever in the past, I ended up in a time where I just felt like I was under a cloud of condemnation. My husband would bring up that scene from The Matrix where Neo finally understands his power and he simply put up his hand and said no.
Right.
And the bullets just fall to the ground. We all have the power and authority that God instilled in us when he put us here. And they do not actually have lawful authority to be ruling over us in this way. In LaRouche's writings we were just reading, he's talking about intent, the intent that is in the very foundation of these systems. And I used to only really hear that talked about in what might be classified as New Age circles. But that principle of intent is so very real. And so we have to have that intent inside of us. And we need to let it rise up. Like that other little story about the little boy whose teacher told him to sit down and shut up. And he complied and then said, I'm standing up on the inside. We all need to be standing up and saying, no more, no more. You don't get to continue to make war. You don't get to continue to starve people. People don't need to freeze to death this winter. We're not going to live under this system of usury any longer. We are created to be free, sovereign individuals with free will. We can work together and live together in peace.
Amen, Susie. Preach. No,
I'm
that's good.
sorry, but y'all get me fired up.
No, that's good. I like that.
Sometimes we need to quit dissecting what they are now trying to do and just stand up and say, no.
I agree.
Yeah, but Susan, you're right to say that, because that the ultimate political.
You froze up,
conclusion
start over.
of the epistemological path of the Tassway. You said, because that the ultimate political conclusion of the Tassway, the great learning, the epistemological path.
Mhm. Right. No, this is good. This is good. I always appreciate these things. These are very good sessions, and I'm really sorry that we had a 2-week nothing happening, but we're back on track, and I'm pretty sure by next week we'll finally have this thing done, and more edifying explorations will proceed after that. I know Quan has proposed a couple of different, or actually a trilogy of Platonic dialogues, meaning of course the statesman, sophist, and Theaetetus, which are just wonderful. So we'll probably do all three, maybe one or two. We'll see, but we'll definitely explore some Plato. I think is the next phase of our journey after we get through this paper. But a lot to explore, so that's going to be good. All right, John, take care. Bye, everybody.
Okay.
Oh, Paul's trying to get back in. That's okay. All right. See ya.
Ciao.
Have a good night. Thanks.
Good night.
So, yeah.